Welcome. Today's topic is CDP eReceipts. eReceipts stands for electronic receipts, which gives the bank or credit union the ability to email or text the receipt to their member or their customers. Various topics that we will discuss will be the rebubble, the receiver configuration, the bubble, the viewing the receipt, parsing the receipt, which means extracting data to understand who this receipt is meant for, masking the data, which is covering up sensitive information, adding and updating information, email, texting the receipt, looking at that receipt in CDP Central. We'll discuss a little bit in regards to pricing and recommended next steps to be able to have you go ahead and get familiar with the application. So let's start with the receiver. So each of you should have a little ET mode, which allows you to configure your little receiver. And your receiver's down here in the corner to be able to determine what mode it's in. So full mode is strictly e-teller mode. eReceipts mode is what we're going to be discussing today, and there's actually a third mode called central only mode, which allows that only to look at the receipts in CDP Central, which is more like a read-only type setup. So entering in 2, it'll go ahead and it'll update my receiver, close it out, cause it back up. So let's take a look at this receiver. So go ahead and down in your system tray, hover over one of these, looks like a little phone jack. That's CDP receiver e-teller. Right-clicking on it, I can click on Open. This will show you exactly if any connections were made, how much data was received. This is a great way to troubleshoot. Sometimes you'll be contacted and saying that eReceipts is not launching. I would recommend looking here. This will say that was data even passed. So even though a data processor may be sending data, it may have not made its way down to the receiver, and that's one area you can look at from a troubleshooting standpoint. Right-clicking again, I'm going to go to Settings. You'll notice here that there's a couple of different options up here at the top. So the main one here is setting up the receiver. So what port is that receiver looking on? Part of what the receiver does is it's looking for data coming over on the IP address of that workstation along on a specific port, and this is where you can go ahead and configure to say what port am I looking on. There's some other features here in regards to data center networks, and I wouldn't really worry about that right now. The middle tab is printers, so this allows you to configure eReceipts to determine, hey, if that customer member actually wants a receipt, where's that receipt going to go to? What printer is it going to go to? So I can set it up and select any of the pre-configured printers on my workstation, or by selecting on manual, it allows me to directly connect to that, typically a thermal printer. And the format here, as you can see, is the IP address, :/port number. A couple other things on this that are of importance is the auto print. Selecting that will actually have that receipt come out on the thermal printer as soon as it launches in eReceipts. Just an option, not many that people use. There's the print checkbox, which will configure eReceipts to actually allow the print button. So that's typically that is checked. And then the other one is more of a technical, and I wouldn't worry about that. Let's hop over to the miscellaneous tab. The main ones up here are the logs. So if there is troubleshooting that needs to be done and you're not really sure what's happening, lots of times we can turn on the logs, and as they begin using it and encounter that issue again, that's one way we can look to see what's happening and possibly send that back to our developers to take a look at more closely. There's also the ability to toggle text button or email button from eReceipts. So globally, that bank or credit union needs to be set up and configured to be able to use eReceipts, but at the individual workstation, you can turn that off. I'm not sure it happens very often, but there may be a case where they don't want to be able to have a certain teller be able to text the receipt, and here's where you can go ahead and turn it off. And the other information in this here is usually more for advanced troubleshooting or some other more isolated scenarios. So let's get into actual eReceipts and the functionality of it. So I'm going to send a test transaction mimicking what a data processor would send to this workstation to go ahead and capture the receipt. And what I should add is our eReceipt solution, envision it sitting between the actual data processor that's processing that transaction and that thermal printer. So prior to it getting to that thermal printer, our little receiver here will actually grab that receipt, parse it, which parsing means it will actually go through, analyze the data, and identify what member or customer it is based on their first name, their last name, and their member number or their account number. This way you can uniquely identify emails and phone numbers that are associated with that account in the database. So as you see here, this little bubble pops up. And the idea with eReceipts is we kind of make it concise. You know, the idea is not to take up a lot of real estate. We grab that receipt, we parse it out, we identify, you know, hey, this is for less paper, this is the account number, here's the emails and phone numbers that I have tied to that, and then here's some slick buttons down here to be able to go ahead and simply email, text, or go ahead and print that. You will notice that these little asterisks are next to the print, email, and text button, and up here you can see auto masking applied. So what auto masking is the ability to pre-configure areas of that receipt that will be masked every single time it gets printed, emailed, or texted. So this avoids that the teller having to manually think about it. It's also designed to be able to cover up sensitive data when it is go ahead and get sent out. So the idea with eReceipts is it captures that receipt, launches this little bubble, gives the teller the ability to drop down, pick that email or phone number, and they can go ahead and, you know, and simply click on the email button. They get another little message here that lets them know that the email was created, and they go ahead and go on their way. And they can simply then close out the bubble, and they're back at their next screen waiting for the next transaction to go ahead and take place. So let's send a second transaction. Again, this is for the same customer or member, so you'll see this receipt will pop up. But let's say this time I want to go ahead and I want to actually view that receipt. So by clicking on view, it's going to bring up a larger window, and I'm going to enhance my screen a little bit so you can see this data a little bit. So what you're seeing in here is in the middle is the actual receipt. We're using a test receipt right now, but the receipt would look exactly like it would for any bank or any credit union that is currently coming out on their thermal printer. So we have that receipt here in the middle, and you'll notice up here at the top under client it shows the name, and again we're seeing the same email and phone numbers that were associated on the previous screen. So, you know, how does this process know exactly who this member is? So it goes back to what I mentioned earlier about parsing. You'll notice up here it says parsing results. So we'll set up, so when we identify what the receipt is, it will actually go through and it's pulling the name from here, and it's pulling the actual member number from here. So to uniquely identify which email and phone numbers are associated with it, because in some cases a bank or credit union may be masking the data on their receipt, so it might be coming over with just partial member numbers or partial account numbers. So how can we uniquely identify that? We do that by identifying what part of the member account number that's non-masked, along with the first name and last name, because once it's masked, there's multiple records that would have that, but we're hoping that there's not multiple John Smiths with the same last four of their member number or account number. So that way we can uniquely identify and go ahead. If the application can't uniquely identify it, it will try to do its best to generate a list that the teller would be able to then go ahead and select to say, yeah, I know this is the right John Smith or this is the right Sally Smith that I want to go ahead and do. So again, the receipt here in the middle looks exactly like it would. It launches in our application. It parses the data out so we know who this is for. Again, we have the ability to be able to notice that there's auto masking that's applied. And there is one way that a teller can override auto masking. That would be to go ahead and select on this little checkbox here. You'll notice that the email and text both become disabled, because the idea is that maybe a customer or member is standing there at the teller window and they want a full receipt that doesn't have any of the information masked. So this way we can go ahead and override it. The tellers can print, unchecking that. They can go ahead and they can email or text it as they want. Okay, so now we talked about the different areas of receipt now. So we're going to talk a little bit about the masking capability. So auto masking is something that you can't see, but it's associated with this because you want to still have the teller be able to see that information. But there's also the ability to manually mask as well. So in this case, I can highlight areas of this receipt. I can click on mask. You'll notice that the X's show up here. So you can have an area of the receipt that's auto mask, and you can have a portion of the receipt that you go ahead and manually mask. At any point, that teller can select undo mask, and that will remove the manually masked information, but it will not remove the anything that's auto mask. Again, the only way to override the auto mask is to be able to go ahead and select on this override auto mask, and again, that only lets you print it unmasked. So what happens if that customer needs to change some of the information? Well, at this point, you'll notice the update email phone number up here. This brings up a list of currently configured or entered in emails, phone numbers, and the system will always remember what they did. So in this point, that I could change the number down here and say, oh, that's supposed to be a 6. I can add additional records if I need to. I can delete those records if I want to. I can also identify what record is primary. That way, when this eReceipts recognizes that a receipt has been processed for a specific customer or member, it will know that this is the first record that I should display to try to avoid the teller having to always select a different one every time. And really, the typical workflow is to have the tellers first ask how they would like that receipt. Do they want it emailed to them? Do they want it texted to them? Would they like it printed? And then if it's email or texted, confirm the phone number, confirm the email address just to verify it's going out to the right that they want. And again, if it needs to be changed, this is where they would go in here and go ahead and make some of those changes. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of this. Again, right from here, I've got the specific phone number that I want it to go to. I select on text. Takes a second for it to go ahead and process, but it's going to go ahead and it's going to text that receipt, and it was gone and sent. And again, if I printed, it would come out in a thermal printer. So I'm done processing this. The teller selects done. It goes ahead and minimizes it, and again, they're at their main screen. So what does these receipts look like? Let's take a look at the receipt. So here's a receipt that I had emailed that we were looking at earlier. And make this a little bit larger. So what you'll notice is a couple of things. The receipt looked exactly like it did in eReceipts. But at the top here, that member number is now X'd out. That's the auto masking that was applied. It wasn't masked out. They could see the full member number inside of eReceipts when I was viewing the receipt. But in this case, when I sent it out text or emailed, and even if I sent it out texted, it would come over as masked. Second, you'll notice the CDP logo down here. This is an image that I've added to this receipt. So when it does convert it, it does take that receipt, it converts it to a PDF, and it'll go ahead and email or text it. So there's a lot of white space down here. And what we've done is we've allowed the ability for that bank or credit union to add images. So it could be their logo, it can be marketing messages, it can be anything else that they want, and they can add multiple ones to kind of fill up some of the space that goes across here. It's a great way to not only brand the receipt to them, but also market and communicate to their customers or their members along with this process. So, and what you see here would mirror again what's in texting. So if I add a marketing message that said, hey, check out our new low rates on our home equity lines of credits, that would show up both whether it's emailed or it's texted. And the bank or credit union is completely self-sufficient. They can go in there and we show them through an admin interface how they can add and remove images. So they're free to go in there and be able to go through that process as often as they want to be able to make those changes whenever they feel necessary. So, all right, let me minimize this. Now, how do we go ahead and see those receipts once they've been processed? So with eReceipts, the idea is that we will capture that receipt and we'll store it for them for a specific amount of time, maybe 2 weeks, maybe up to a month at most, and then we'll start to remove those receipts as time goes on. The idea is that eReceipts is configured to simply allow that bank or credit union to email or text the receipt. It's not a long-term storage repository type application as what eTeller would be. So CDP Central should have a link up there. It goes ahead and brings up a little bit of a search criteria. So CDP Central allows you to go look at any receipts that have been saved. So ideally, you can filter down whether, hey, I just want to look at teller number 1, I want to look at a specific date range, whatever. You can see the criteria here. I'm going to use today's date. It brings back all the receipts that were processed that day based on the criteria. And as I enter through here, you can start to see the data change over here on the right. And if I need to see more information on this receipt, double clicking on it brings it up in full mode. Full mode now gives me the ability to still change email addresses, update the phone numbers, I can go ahead and update emails if I need to, just like I could before. Go ahead and re-email, text, or print it like I could before. But it gives the bank or credit union the ability to go back and look at those receipts after they've been processed. And maybe there's a case where initially the member had that receipt printed for them and then they lost it. They called back in, hey, is there a way I can get that receipt? Yep, let me add your email address and go ahead and email that to you securely with the auto masking applied. So remember, CDP Central is a way to go ahead and see any of the saved receipts. Once in eReceipts you hit that done button, the only way you can go back and look at that receipt is to go back into CDP Central and be able to see that receipt through there. If you don't see it in CDP Central, then more than likely it was wiped out, but typically in that case, the bank or credit union has their own long-term storage copy of it from some other way. So last couple of things, pricing. How does pricing work for CDP eReceipts? Pricing is based on per branch. So we typically have a dollar amount, let's say $30 per branch per month. Doesn't matter, any number of workstations, go ahead and use it. It's just simply designated by the branch. So when they look for pricing, maybe there'll be a little bit of a setup. We'll understand the number of branches that they have, and then we'll go ahead and configure the pricing that way. All that needs to be installed typically is that little receiver down here that we were talked about at the beginning of the video. That's really what gives that workstation the ability to be able to capture that receipt and go ahead and use the eReceipts capability. And depending on the data processor, how that receipt gets to that receiver is different. Galaxy uses a CFP process. Other ones set up their own individual print queues. So it's really depends on how that data processor routes their print jobs, but typically that receiver is set up so that that print job goes to the workstation, the IP of that workstation, and the port configured in that receiver so that we can go ahead and capture that data. The couple other things to mention is we will typically purchase a phone number for each bank or credit union so that it's a consistent text message phone number that they're receiving from. We use a company called Twilio, and we will try to get a number that's somewhat close, at least the same area code if possible, to that bank or credit union. And if they have multiple branches, we still typically just go ahead and need one. So as I wrap this up, what I would suggest as far as next steps is make sure you have this loaded on your workstation. Go ahead and actually launch CDP eReceipts. You should have a text transaction that's already there. You should have the receiver that's already been installed. So there's no reason that you can't go ahead and set your mode using that ET_mode capability to put yourself in eReceipts mode. Send yourself a test transaction. Begin playing around with the bubble. Send yourself an email. Send yourself a text. Go into view. Kind of do the same thing. Look at those receipts in CDP Central. Make sure you have a real clear understanding of how eReceipts works in the different aspects of it to make sure that you are comfortable. And then lastly, go ahead and ask questions. Let's understand any question you have in regards to pricing, functionality, why we do something a certain way or why we don't do it a certain way, and kind of go from there. So this kind of wraps up our eReceipts brain dump, if you will. I encourage you to take notes, watch this a couple of times if you need to, fast forward, rewind back, but it should give you a good start to how we use eReceipts and how it can benefit a bank or a credit union. Thank you.